One morning, one man woke up to find himself almost not there. At least a particular part of himself. The part that was always searching for himself. A man complained, "I am addled and confused." And someone asked, "For how long?" "Every time I think about it," he replied. And the someone said, "Then it would seem to me, based on the words you use to describe the situation, that you have three ways to approach it. Either abandon being addled, confused, or thinking about it." And the man slapped himself on the forehead and cried out, "Dunce! How could I for so long have missed it?" In the world of the mind, to believe that illusionary activity can produce real results is a quite high and impressive peak in the stupid mountain range. Climbing, climbing, always climbing. Never moving, but always climbing. And whining about it, of course. There was once some non-stop activity which developed the ability to speak. And what do you think was the very first thing it did? Yep, that's right. It gave itself a name, thus turning it into a verbally sounding object rather than activity. And why, you may ask, do I bring this up? Is it because the activity did itself harm by this naming? Did it interfere with its operations? Or perhaps simply created a confusing situation? Yes, why, you may ask, did I bother to bring the subject forward? Well, geez, it's just a subject. Why all the whys? A man asked a stranger, if man's mental world is an enclosed, go-nowhere, self-fueling, self-consuming, meaningless illusion, then what could be more foolish and increased doses of the same than struggling to realize this? In what way is the discovery of a septic field of more value than the field itself? And the stranger said, do you really want a response to that? And when the man hesitated, he added, or do you really need one? And the man suddenly recognized that it had been his hesitation to see this that had caused him to ask the question. Thus, case closed. As if within a finite system there can practically be an endless, ongoing, open investigation. Knowing where to stop and shift directions can be as important as knowing where to begin. One man chewed his food really well, for 50 years in fact, before spitting it out. As soon as the two brothers got to the house, one of them said, boy, I hope there's something good on TV or else I'll have to listen to my thinking. And the other one said, man, I hope something good goes on in my thinking or I'll have to watch TV. And somewhere, the muse of all mortal media said, that's okay, let them go ahead and bad rap their local diversions. I won't take it personally, since they can't actually think about anything that is not in truth themselves. Or as the latest kid quiz joke goes, what's the difference between a movie screen and your mind? You have to sit further away from the movie screen. A man went and stood before the cubicle of the oracle. And from within the oracle's voice asked, what is your problem? And the man replied, you mean right this instant? Okay, said the oracle, right this instant. Well, said the man, right this instant, I don't have a problem. Next, yelled the voice from the cubicle. Roll me over in the clover and do it again, was one of the first songs that life taught men's lax mental flow. A man asked a stranger, "What is the difference between information and entertainment?" I realize that they're both aspects of the mind, but what specifically is their difference? And the stranger replied, "If you realize that anything is an aspect of the mind, then you should have no need to ask how it differs from some other specific something. You should then be aware that in the mental realm, nothing differs from anything else. It's all the same thing." And for a moment, the man didn't know whether he was informed or entertained. There was once a man who began to suspect that he was dying faster than was necessary, due to a gradual but continual loss of blood, metaphorically speaking, represented by every word he uttered. From our viewer's mailbag comes this letter. "My uncle and I have been watching your show for several years now, and we've gotten into an argument over a question that we'd appreciate you answering for us. In a story some time back, a man was someplace wherein he was confronted with a sign that said, 'Don't spit on the floor or pee in the sink.' And my uncle says that this man was in a weightlifter's gym, and I say the location was in someone's mind. For the sake of familiar peace, please settle this matter for us, faithful viewers, us, etc." Do you ever wonder, is it the mail that runs slow, or some part of man that's behind the time? A man asked a stranger, "Is there such a thing, if there is such a thing as the enlightenment, can it be achieved in the midst of others?" "No," he replied. "Well," said the man, "if the awakening actually exists, can it be taught? Can you be taught how to reach it?" "No," he replied. And the man asked, "Well, if the great liberation is a real possibility, can it be gained from where a man is now?" "No," replied the stranger. And the man, not being able to think of any more immediate questions, thanked him and left. Did you notice in the story of near 100 words, the word think appeared only once? For years, one man chased his shadow, and of course never caught it. But don't be ashamed for him. He wasn't aware of any of it. Based on the man's apparent interest in such, a certain stranger so said to him, theoretically, the best way to go about this would be to study every map ever used by anyone who's successfully gone before you, then ignore them all and make up one strictly of your own from scratch, which seems an impossibility, what? And after the man pondered this for a moment, then nodded his agreement to the improbability alluded to, the stranger added, "But what question does this actually address? The difficulty in producing a truly original map, or the inherent limitations of the mind itself?" Directions can't go anywhere the mind can't go, and the mind can't go where it's never been before. And of course, the mind will refute this last statement, pointing out that it is demonstratively impossible, or else no one would ever be able to learn anything new. Sounds impressive. Can you see the hole in it? If so, then you're on the way to seeing a whole heck of a lot more. If you're in the mind, when you say the word mind, you have no understanding of what the word represents. Simple version. No one knows what the mind is. A boy asked his father, "What is the difference between being stabbed and being insulted?" And the elder replied, "Years ago I would have found such a question indicative of your promise. Now I find it disappointing that you can still find such distinctions while knowing that without blood, no thought flows." And cringing, in familiar shame, the lad attempted to kick himself in the crotch but missed, and struck instead his old man in the head. which constructively serve the same ultimate purpose, since trees seldom, far from unrelated nuts, spring up to claim their place in the woodwind section. According to one super-duper, super-secret, life in this universe, when it wants to delude a race of beings, will make them believe that planning is a meaningful possibility. One man used to ask a stranger questions until he began to suspect that his inquirers were getting somehow close to the end of what could be asked about. So he stopped asking. Well, he didn't really stop, but he'd periodically think about stopping. And one man thought, I already know too much as it is. Everything's an illusion, and the struggle to realize this damn sure is. One man advises, don't bother to say it's always something. In a universe that's alive, it is always something. This also includes your mental universe. There can be a difference in you thinking that you have a mind and you thinking that you have thoughts. A sack of unopened cement is not exactly the same thing as a sack with a split in it. A father asked a son, in such terms as the method of Zen, the Sufi method, the method of yoga, which is the funniest word therein? Zen, Sufi, yoga, or method? One day as he began to remove his trousers, a man thought his pocket had been picked, but then realized that he had no pocket and wondered how long this had been the case. And finally, the effort to get on the right track has derailed many a train. The mind continues to hide itself, hide its nature from itself, right out in the open, as if it had anywhere to hide. But one of the ways that it continues to secret its own nature from its own view is through concepts, through discriminatory concepts. There are as many possible examples in life as there are examples of life. That is correct. That is, I did not misspeak. One that continues to be of popular discussions, a part of popular discussions by observers, is the apparent moral nature of political leaders. That humans continue to wrangle over specific instances wherein a political leader is found to be wanting in so-called scruples. It would be easy enough, someone's already laughed, more of a scoff, but it would be easy enough. If you knew enough history, any of us, go back thousands of years and find references as soon as civilization seemed to have started, that shortly thereafter, as soon as they all got together and elected someone to be in charge of the first little community, as soon as they began to become little wheat growers, became little farming communities, and elected some little burger, if not a hot dog, to be in charge of their little community, within moments, months, weeks after the first man was elected, first man that they decide the best among us, or who wants the job of sort of being in charge, shortly thereafter they found the man doing what? Taking unauthorized vacations to Southern California, golf treks to Hawaii at the community's expense. You can find it 5,000 years ago, you can find it 5 minutes ago. It's always being exposed. But at any rate, and by the way, is point out to you that that would include religious leaders. It's all a matter of power. But the mind continues. It finds it easiest to pick on political figures rather than religious. It is a non-ending process of nowadays a reporter, but someone, uncovering in their leaders, in their leader, unsavory, immoral, unscrupulous behavior. And then that furnishes, for months after, even longer in some cases, heated discussions amongst intellectuals of their day and time, political observers, philosophers, moral commentators on that specific instance of, King so-and-so, the Prime Minister, or our local alderman. We had such faith. And look at them. Here is the mind, because we're not talking about people and we're not talking about politics. We're not even talking about civilization. All of this is absolutely, when you see it, equitable to the human mind. I know it appears otherwise, and that apparently civilization exists, apparently the body politic exists, but none of it exists outside the mind. Or to slip up on it, none of it would exist were it not for man's mind. And so everything that is outside your pants owes its existence to the human mind. It is directly traceable to the mind and nowhere else. And once you see the nature of the mind, even though it appears to be comparing two impossibilities, it is not so. Politics, religion, art is all the same thing as the human mind. But people will continue to discuss, as though it is of some importance, they continue to discuss it at the highest possible assumed intellectual level as being more than captious assails on our public figures, more than just whining and complaining, that they attempt to use it. They present it as being new information, new fodder by which we might be able to uncover the nature of the human spirit, the psychology of certain men. Why does a man go bad? Why did this man work his way up through local politics, run for several offices, has a fine family, 2 beautiful children, and finally gets himself elected governor of our fine, fair state, serves 1 term, seems to do good, was in favor of family values, the morals of the community, education, and now elected for a 2nd term, a final term, and now look, his administration is down to his private office, down to the governor's office itself. It is nothing but now, day after day, one more revelation of greed, payoffs, outright thievery, lying. It's just and you know that then once, whoever it is, once the discussion is out there in public for some length of time, if it has legs, if it has public interest, it will be discussed pro and con. People will discuss the pressures on the man. People will then discuss, other writers or commentators will say, well, I've never trusted him. And it's always on the basis of that specific man. Here is the nature, it's just a perfect example. As I said, they're all perfect, but here is one that seems to be of extreme importance. It's our leadership. And why do we continue to elect or to allow someone to take over the reins of power? And why is it so often that then they become corrupt? If you believe that the mind will ever see the nature of the mind, this is as prime an example again as possible, that the nature of the mind is sitting right out there naked, stripped, as obvious as a big fat man at an AA meeting, naked. I forgot to add that. Naked fat man with a rash at a Wednesday night prayer meeting. How about that? I could have made it worse. But I guess that's bad enough. It is as obvious. It could not be any plainer. The two things I'm trying to point out tonight, one of them is newer than the other, or it may sound fresher to you than the one I'm on now, but has to do with this hiding, lurking in, being camouflaged by concepts such as morality, basic concept of good and evil. But the first obvious part is now I got to do all this conditionally. I'll get back and pick up the dismantling the otherworldly analyzation of the terms and ideas that I'm about to express for ordinary people I'm at. I'll take the words apart. But right now we've got to use, for me to press on with the beginning, the words that ordinary people, ordinary minds use. Morality, goodness, scruples, etc. The mind continues to be astounded, it says, at the number of instances of leaders who proved to be sans scruples, men of no morals, or men of questionable morals, all sorts of little instances. And here is the simple fact. It's never been different. It will not be different. It has always been true, and it's right there in front of people. Now I'm using their terms, what ordinary minds refer to as morals, scruples, in a deep sense of unswavering honesty. Now let's just take, we know what people think they mean by it. Right. Men who display, men who possess those qualities never seek power. It could not be plainer. And now, having said that, when I say they never seek power, even in your lifetime, if you pay any attention, they're always, surely in everyone's lifetime, and somewhere within your local culture, that is, where you would recognize it, as opposed to being in another part of the world, in some other political system and in some other language, but there is almost, I'm sure in everyone's lifetime, an exception to this. Locally, even on a national level sometimes, or semi-national level, an exception to this. A man will seem to get all heated up, a man or a woman nowadays, and get all heated up over the moral issues and et cetera, and get themselves elected to some office and prove to be as effective as an extremely fat, nude man at a Wednesday night Baptist prayer meeting. If you have any ability to see and you were keeping up, you can look at them as soon as they offer for office. You can just turn on TV, see them there on that little screen with all the electrons, this representation of another human, and he walks up and he says, "I would like to announce," and that's about all it takes. Or maybe just see him walk up. If you know how to do it, just see him, they say, "Here is so-and-so, local minister, a local businessman," somebody, and they say, "And here is an important announcement, a man that I'm sure you'll be hearing more about, and here he is." And they've got some group there of lackeys, his friends, they applaud, and the guy walks up. And you know it's going to be something political, and he walks up. Trust me, if you can do it many times, you can see the man move, and you know what's going to happen. Well, let's say that you know he's about to announce for office. You know one thing, he's got no business being there. Even if he gets elected, he's going to be a one-shot deal. The man has no business being there, and you can see him move and know it. I mean, just instantly. And if that doesn't work, it may take a few more seconds, and he begins to speak. At any rate, and just in case you had thought of an exception, it does happen. And again, even with exceptions, the mind, the ordinary intelligence of some collective people, in this sense, the example I'm using, the electorate of some nation, even when they see this happen, that they know it happens, no one ever seems to take any lesson from it. No one ever seems to make anything about it. About the best it said, the man is quickly forgotten. He'll lose the next election. Sometimes they'll quit. Sometimes the man himself, once he gets in office, within a period of time, if he doesn't last, even if he lasts the next election or not, he will announce that he's sick of it, that it's worse than he imagined. He knew that there was some dirty dealings going on, but he feels so impotent. He feels like he's the only voice of reason and decency there in the halls of Congress or wherever it is, and that he just had it. You know, I wash my hands of it. Those who seek power are free from the concept that the majority have of honesty, of good and evil is what it amounts to. But it has nothing to do with good and evil. There's no such thing as good and evil. When it comes to a matter of survival, there is no such thing as good and evil. There is no such thing, to take it into more specifics, in the world of politics. There's no such thing as good and evil. In the world of politics of religion, there's no such thing as good and evil. Someone does not get to be pope on the basis of good or evil. I'm just using pope for the Catholic Church. It's the most commonly known obvious one. It's a political job, but a political job to local church. If it's not a one-man operation that the guy started, religion is the same thing. It's the same thing as politics. Anyone who attempts to lead other people, it's a matter of the alpha male wolf. And there is no such thing as any concept in leadership. There is no such thing as a mental consideration. Those who sincerely want to be in a position of power, people who run for office in high school, and that and they'll say later, when I was 12, 13 years old, I knew what I wanted to be, and that was in politics. I knew that I wanted to be out there serving my fellow man, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Those who do that have no concept of good and evil. But let me be sure to point this out very quickly for those of you who can't hear. That's not good or evil either. That's not an attack on them. It's then what continues to keep the mind of ordinary people entangled and keeps them, this isn't what keeps them, but I'm just describing how it operates, but it keeps them from seeing what is right in front of them, is then the discussions of different minds discussing, how did this happen? How often will this happen? What can we do to stop this? All things that are absolutely meaningless. The discussions are as meaningless as the concern over, wait a minute, are you suggesting that our leaders, even our religious leaders, may have no morals? Wait a minute, I must disagree. So you've got a new discussion. And you look, if you could see, if the mind could see what's right in front of it, which is its own nature, you would see that there is no discussion. It's not a theory. There's nothing to discuss. You either see it or you don't. But the concept that we vote for people, that we allow people to lead us who are good, that is a concept. It's meaningless. There's no such thing as good and evil. Some of you that's well read in the areas of so-called metaphysics, when someone even gets to the point, or even in philosophy, but especially in what is normally thought of as the mystical literature, when someone ever gets around to mentioning this, some guy fools around and comes up with something close to this, and they'll point out, well, there seems to be somewhere, in some great state of enlightenment, in some extreme, far-reaching, otherworldly states of consciousness, it seems to be that some of the great figures, and I don't know, it just seems to be that there may be a place from which they look upon what we think of as being good and evil, and they have, I don't know, a different view. Not that they don't see that there's good and evil. They always throw that in case you still need any sort of litmus test about when you're wasting your time listening to anybody. Of course, the real one is if they're talking, you're wasting your time. But especially when they will finally get around to something about, well, it seems as though humanity's ideas of good and evil are open to some question, as all the world's great mystics have noted. Dash. But let me be quick to add, that does not mean that they had no awareness of the intrinsic, inescapable, radical reality in this universe of good and evil. That's like a dog doing his business in front of your house. And then afraid you saw that he did it, and he backs up and squats over it again and starts doing, look into my eyes, look into my eyes. And when he's got you distracted, he drops another load on the basis I'll cover up the first one and you won't know who did it. That was the best I could come up with on the spot, and it works for me. I guess if I was speaking, well, this is on tape, I should stop. I'm at the point that any ordinary mind, you know by now, I'll go ahead and get into this. You know by now that any ordinary mind on this planet, any decent person, if they heard me say that and thought I was serious, they would turn it off. They would quit listening. They simply will. If you say there's no such, the idea of good and evil is just a dream. You cannot say that to decent, ordinary minds. You cannot say it. Nor would I normally. You tricked me into it. Yeah, I should. No, you didn't. I started to comment on it, but I won't. You do know the ordinary minds will turn you off immediately. They cannot deal with it. Now, you can say other things. You can say, well, the idea of sweet and sour is your imagination. People are going to go, well, like, you mean like metaphorical? Oh, no. No. You know what sweet is. The taste of sweet. Yeah. You know what the taste of sour is. Yeah. Well, I mean literally, there is no such thing. They might sit there. They could at least sit there and just say, well, you're wrong. And go ahead and listen and think, well, one mistake you made, I'll continue to listen. It's been pretty interesting up until now. But if you come right out and say, there's no such thing as good and evil, there's much reality to that. There's more reality to sweet and sour than there is good and evil. You know that the mind of a decent person, an ordinary person, will not only would just shut you off, they will normally, they will at least shut you off, but very often they will aggressively, actively disagree, repudiate it. And yet the truth is right in front of them, the reality of it. It sounds, well, there's no sense staying here. It is part of the concept that people either act one way or the other, and the two main ways being decently or indecently, properly or improperly. And so human minds look upon other humans, and I just picked out leaders. It's the easiest to see. You're doing it constantly with everyone, but especially leaders, and it just magnifies it as a grander example than the lack of basis, the mistaken basis, the conceptual basis of judging other people's behavior is just magnified. It's more ridiculous because it is more simplistic to see the leaders and for them to be constantly scrutinized and criticized for a lack of common morality. They got no morality. They got no morals, no scruples. And then you say, well, that's not good. You blew it. Morals has the same reality as good does. There's really nothing else I can do with that except go around and around and around. But consider, assuming that any of you hear that it's not a matter of good and evil, it's not a matter of proper or improper, it's a matter of the mind making judgmental or having judgmental conceptions of a world that does not exist. The world of leadership exists. The world of people that want to take power, that want to take charge, that exists. That exists. If there's a sign up announcing that they're going to start a garden club in your neighborhood, and you go over there and there's just 5 or 6 or a dozen ordinary people, housewives, house husbands, and they're there, someone will take charge of that damn thing. And everyone else will be agreeable. There may be 2 people that won't be in charge. One will lose, very likely drop out, leave, but one person will take charge of the garden club. And the rest of the people, they don't analyze it, but if they did, they would be glad to have someone with that much interest, because it's very likely his idea to start the club, which was not for the sake of gardening, it was for the sake of him being in charge of some people. He could be interested in gardening, but I'm telling you it's secondary. A wolf does not pick out some pack and decide that there is a specific reason that he wants to be a leader of that pack. That he likes their particular taste in agriculture, that he likes the kind of areas in which they congregate. He wants to be in charge. That's the reason he does it. But the people who are there are agreeable to it. They have no choice. All of this, by the way, is based upon the illusion in a news item tonight that said that there was one universe in which the life there, when it wished to delude the creatures, the thinking creatures, of course, but when it wished to delude them, it made them believe that planning was possible. Aren't you glad we don't live in that damn place? So because if you believe that planning is possible, then after that, there is no turning back. There is no way that you can directly see that all of the other concepts of the mind are vacuous. That is, well, I planned to vote for an honest man, and I planned. It was my intention. All this is plans. He planned. He told me his plans was to run an honest government. And now look at him. My hopes and his plans, my hopes and my plans for the future of a decent community here, a good, honest state, have been dashed thanks to him. No, not thanks to him, sarcastically. Thanks to your mind. You had an expectation of something that does not exist. Well, I can name it. I know. Well, if we can describe it, everybody can name it. It's not just me. I know. You mean you don't understand evil or good or honesty when you see it? I understand it when you see it. I understand what you mean. Oh, yeah. Now take it to the mind. All I can do is just jump over to it. The concepts of the mind hold a preeminent position in each person. Each person is almost a cartoonish version of a passive electorate. And even that's bullshit, because there is no such thing as a passive electorate in you. But notice, a bunch of you responded to me like, aha, like you saw something. What? Where? An honest politician, maybe. An honest leader. When the mind accepts that there are concepts, that there are observable bases for judgment of other humans, of course I'm putting it to you backwards. The mind already accepts that about itself, but it doesn't see it. And so you have to start further on down the line. You have to start after the mind is already engaged in fallacious activity, so to speak. That is, outside of itself, looking for honest people. Or just looking out in the world and thinking there's goodness and there's evilness. The only reason you do that is because the mind has already accepted such concepts about itself. But you can't start off saying that. As you see, it's almost impossible to say it even without starting out there. To try and point out that out in the external world there is no basis for discriminatory judgments. There is no basis for any discriminatory concepts. If you think there are, there are. And anyone who knows anybody wouldn't tell you. And I don't know what kind of goddamn fool I am standing up here doing it on a videotape that ends up sometimes playing the civilians. It's an absolute waste. Absolute. It's got nothing to do with stupidity. But the mind will not see it. The mind will not see that it is based entirely. It cannot escape from discriminatory, useless, meaningless concepts about itself. There is no way after that to point out to the mind, under any ordinary conditions, that all of the concepts of propriety and impropriety, good and evil, that they see out in the world is an illusion. Of course, illusion is simply another damn concept. It does not exist. It's a word. It is an electrical impulse with a sound that went through the human brain, that there is no such thing out there, and it's got nothing to do with philosophy. It's got nothing to do with my opinion, your opinion. It's got nothing to do with relative values. All of that is bullshit. All of that is an illusion of the mind. It is, by the way, we always need to give credit. There is one necessary illusion. Absolutely necessary illusion of the mind. And that's it. What, did I miss it? I don't know. That's it. When you have, which everyone does, once you have one discriminatory thought, once you have a concept that one thing in life is preferable to another, you're a walking dead man. That is, you're normally, intellectually excited, activated, agitated. But in the sense of ever understanding life again, you're a dead man. You have to give rebirth to yourself after that. But as soon as you can think, you're a dead man. You have gone to sleep. You have staggered into a darkened cave. Take any allegory you want to. You simply have. And life stays the same. The nature of what happened, the nature of the mind, because everything else is there, but the nature of the mind is right there in the open. Another instant allegory, I guess. It's like a pervert out exposing himself in life, and every time you hear somebody holler pervert, variation of one of my old ones, he immediately closes his overcoat and rushes over to help. Where? To help look for him. I can do that one better, but it'll make even less sense. He opens his overcoat to expose himself, and someone hollers pervert, and he runs over to the person that hollered it, which would have been him, and opens his overcoat twice. Or wider. I warned you. All right? Maybe this one. When they holler pervert, he immediately grabs a mirror and holds it out in front of him, a full-length mirror, in response. You see how it goes? You try and describe to the mind what's going on. They go, huh. Sometimes it laughs, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes they go, huh, sometimes not. And it's all the same thing. The reality of what the mind is doing is everywhere. There would be no discretion were it not for the mind operating on what amounts to useless concepts. There's no such thing as a useful concept. A useful concept never fed a man. A useful concept never made a man warm. A useful concept never kept anyone alive. We all know this, though. The more you're dealing with people who live in the mind, that is, the ordinary sophisticated, in fact, the avant-garde of the sophisticated, the erudite, the elite, the genteel, at every time and place, the more we're speaking of those people, the more they will say. The more that they will insist that I am far from being correct. They will insist it more than the middle class, so to speak, because they will say, no, men do not live, certainly, so to speak, by bread alone, but it is the morality of a people. It is their artistic taste. It is the degree to which they are civilized. That it is all of those things that indeed are the beacon that indeed are the banner under which civilization is marching forward, that they would say, well, you know this. And I'm sure some of you grew up, and your minds would tell you that now. That contrary, serious contrary to what I'm saying, that all of these concepts are meaningless, the more that you are living in the forward part of the mind, the more that you're in the front of life's collective parade, the more vehemently your mind resists that. And it says no. No, as a matter of fact, that is the benchmark of a civilized man. That is how we're judging that we're making progress, is that more and more people realize that ideas do matter. Morality does count. That the inner mental world of man is, in fact, not just as important as his physical well-being, but ultimately more so. It's always going on. It just seems to be louder now, and there is some validity. There is some reality to it being louder because more and more people say that. It is indefensible. It is unassailable. I can't, with an ordinary person, you notice I can describe it perfectly. And I certainly cannot turn to an ordinary man that would describe that, an ordinary mind, and say one word that would shake him out of that. You know, I couldn't describe it unless I understood it completely. And understand completely, I know that it's bulletproof. And it's not the argument you understand that we're talking about. It's the mind. It is an enclosed system. There's no way in, there's no way out. Almost. There's the matter of whether you ever see what the mind is. And of course see what it is not. Normally I would refer to it as you see the nature of the mind. You see the nature of what's going on in your head. When you do, there is no discussion of what's going on in life. But as I said, you can look at it life. And I'm pushing it and speaking sort of wink-wink theoretically when I say that if people could be intelligent, if the mind could ever see what was going on, you would think by now, and I go through all these theatrics and come up with these examples, that humanity continues to play out the same things over and over and over and over and over and over, and everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. And you point to it, and they pretend as though it's an anomaly. They pretend, well, this is the first time it ever happened. Or, my God, this is the exception. That's why I picked out a prime example of political leaders, or anyone in a position of authority. Anyone, it doesn't matter, but politics is the easiest to kick at. Anyone in authority that has any business being there, that's going to stay there, that wants to be there and is satisfied that they are receiving their pleasure in life by being there, they have no sense of morality. Any that they express is great acting. Except it's not just acting because it takes an audience. Those who either vote for them are led by them, because tyrants do not stay in office by the dint of force. It's only people outside that say, oh my God, these poor people been ruled by this maniac, this tyrant for 2 decades. Oh, those helpless people. Again, that just shows a person has, the mind saying that has not even an idea of what life's about. And that could be somebody famous, it could be somebody well educated, but once you see the nature of the mind, then you realize all of this, from the top to the bottom, from popes to kings to prime ministers, in a sense it is, and to call them children is really charitable, but it's children dressed up, babbling. Now, I'm not making fun of it. Once you see it, you're through with it. But from the position I'm saying, if the mind actually had any possibility of ever seeing itself, then such as this would thousands of years ago have become quite clear. That people do not seek power. People do not take power that have any sense of what the rest of them call morality or scruples. Because power, the kind we're talking about, now can be less or more related to survival. And that's one reason the politics is usually the best example, because in many cases it is closer to matters of physical survival for those involved than it would be the head of a garden club. Or under certain conditions, most conditions, probably more so than the religious leaders, unless the religion and the state is in conflict. But at any rate, the people that seem to be in charge have never displayed any sense of morality. And the people who are led by them, and they allow it, which is just a word, it's an audience. It's an audience and a performer, if you want to look at it this way, except it gets down to the physical level. But it's not based on physical power. A tyrant, he may have armed guards everywhere, and he may be surrounded by bodyguards, and he may keep an army going all the time. But that is not what keeps him in power. What keeps him in power is his audience. What keeps him in power is the unstated reality that he is the man to be doing it. If there was a stronger dog around, he would take over. And the people, as long as they're satisfied with what's being done, they're satisfied. And people say that they won't change their mind and their own character. Look at politics, because we're still talking about the mind. People say, well, I don't like my character. I don't like, of course, would-be mystics, they say, well, I don't like my sense of I don't like my personality. I don't like what my state of consciousness is. Well, why don't you change the motherfucker? Well, you sit there and complain about it. You surely know what I just said. A tyrant, I don't care who it is, the head of some country, he can have 1/10 the population under arms. He can have 1/10 of the population as his standing army. And for whatever reason, it's life itself. But if the other 90% of the people, or the other 80%, whoever it is, if the people decide that's enough, the man's gone. No wolf can stand up to a pack if it turns on him. He stays there because the people, the audience is satisfied. Put it to you another way, life stays in balance. There is no such thing as injustice. There is no such thing as some poor group of people being downtrodden by some maniac. If you believe that, explain your mind to me. Explain your complaint with you to me. Explain why you continue to struggle with yourself, and I'm going to become more conscious. I'm going to rid myself of this unruly, unenlightened part of me. Well, why don't you do it? If there's that much of a sense of right and wrong, and that you now see that there is a part of a man's consciousness, your consciousness, that is proper, there's a part of it to follow. The part that comes down here and listens to this, the part that may go home and read nice, impressive, spiritual literature. Then that old part of you that wants to go out and get drunk and go to movies and just, I don't know, and get mad at people. And shake their fist at politicians. Well, why don't you do something about it? I'll tell you why. You can't. I'll tell it to you another dirty way. You're satisfied. Of course, then, if you get good enough, you realize, yeah, I am satisfied inside that country. I am satisfied in the mind. That's why it doesn't change. But once you step over the border, it's another story. If you're in country A and here you have this madman, everybody's bitching about him, or that's the common conversation. You bring him up to the man on the street, and they go, oh, that son of a bitch. You know, if we ever get him off our back. And you hear it everywhere you go. Step over the border into country B, and then look back at it, and you realize these people are deluding themselves. Nobody's being held down. And forget politically, religiously, socially. You're not being held down. Man went to the cubicle of the great oracle and stood before it. And from the cubicle a voice says, what is your problem? And the man said, well, if you put it like that, you mean right this instant? The voice of the oracle said, okay, right this instant. And the man went, well, if you're going to say right this instant, or nothing, I guess. And from the cubicle came the wise voice that shouted, next! Or there was a man who chewed his food really well for 50 years, in fact, before spitting it out. How long can you chew on the same thing? How long can you look out at life and cock your head like the old RCA logo of the little dog seen before the speaker? That was the early one, if you guys didn't know, back when it was a gramophone with this big speaker back in the first decade of this century. And RCA came up with this logo and was supposed to represent the curiosity that a dog suddenly hears sounds like Caruso singing or whoever, human sounds coming out of this thing, and the dog going, which of course the dogs, if you ever get a puppy and put it up in front of a TV or something the first time or two, they'll still do it. Oh, how cute. Don't be condescending. Don't say how cute. Don't say how cute until you look at you. And you don't even have the excuse. A dog at least could talk. And you could say, well, hey, you silly little thing. It's just a machine. It's just playing back. Human voices recorded something on this CD, and you try to describe it, and you say it's just being played back, and it turned it back into the mechanical energy of a sound wave coming out of a speaker. That's all it is. What's wrong with you? Don't pull that shit on a puppy. Not until you tell me how you continue to internally go. So that's what I think. I had no idea that people could be so gross. I had no idea that evil had permeated even this part of the universe. I had no idea I was such a decent fellow after all. I had no idea that I'm so easily touched. And I remember his name, Nipper. Which if you don't know in Southern colloquial speak, Nipper is a very small child, like a little baby. Bunch of nippers. Yes, but I have a PhD in philosophy. I understand that. Nipper. Oh, well, all right, if you prefer, Dr. Nipper.